throwaway account because I still have people from my old unit lurking Reddit, and I'm not in the mood for side texts or "you good" messages. So, context. I served long enough to know the difference between service and being useful to people who don't respect you. I got out not because I couldn't handle it, but because I'd already handled more than most of the people who later tried to humiliate me ever would. This story technically starts after my service, but the rot? That started long before. The night everything turned was a storm. Not a poetic one. A real, angry, sideways rain, visibility at zero storm. After my shift, I was driving back toward the base in Norfolk. I was exhausted in that very specific way where your body is on autopilot and your brain is just quiet. Wind shaking the car, rain hitting the windshield like gravel. That kind of storm where everyone pretends they don't see anything on the road because stopping would be inconvenient. On the shoulder, I saw a car. Hazards on, hood up, completely dead. Inside, through the blur of rain, I saw movement. A woman, a man, a kid in the back seat. I already knew what my senior sergeant's voice would sound like in my head. Not your problem. You're not on duty. Keep moving. I slowed anyway, pulled over anyway. The second I opened my door, the wind almost knocked it back into me. Rain soaked me instantly. The kid was crying, not screaming, just that quiet, scared sound kids make when they're trying to be brave because adults are watching. I ran over, shouted over the storm, helped them out one by one, put myself between the kid and the wind without thinking about it, called emergency services, gave my jacket to the woman. The man watched me closely, too closely, calm, assessing, not panicked like most people would be. When help was on the way and the worst had passed, he asked me one thing. "What's your name?" That was it. Not where I worked, not what unit, not rank, just my name. I told him, and I didn't think anything of it. Because at that point in my life, my name had been the only thing I still felt belonged to me. I drove back to base, soaked, tired, and completely unaware that this storm was about to drag a whole lot of buried things into the open. And that the people who had spent years trying to make me small were about to realize just how badly they'd misjudged who I was. Back at the base, nobody cared that I came in soaked to the bone. No questions. No, "You okay?" No, "What happened out there?" I logged the vehicle, dropped my gear, changed into dry clothes, and went straight to my bunk like nothing unusual had happened. That was the routine. You learn quickly that explaining yourself just creates opportunities for people to minimize you. The next morning, my senior sergeant glanced at me and frowned. "You look like hell." Not concern. Assessment. "Long night," I said. He nodded like that confirmed something he already believed. Figures. That word. Figures. He used it a lot. Like my exhaustion, my silence, my reliability were predictable flaws instead of the cost of carrying half the workload. At that point, I was already used to being invisible in a very specific way. On paper, I existed. In practice, I was infrastructure. I handled logistics when others messed up, covered shifts when people weren't feeling it, fixed reports before inspections, stayed late, came early, took responsibility without rank to match it. And somehow, every time something went right, it was the team. Every time something went wrong, it was suddenly my area. The humiliation wasn't loud back then. It was subtle, surgical. My sergeant never raised his voice, never outright insulted me. He just erased me in public and drained me in private. If I asked about a recommendation, he'd sigh dramatically. "You're rushing things. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. There are optics to consider." Optics. That word should come with a warning label. I noticed changes slowly. Like temperature drops you only feel once you're already cold. My evaluations stopped improving, even though my responsibilities increased. Awards I was told had been submitted, quietly expired. Training opportunities somehow always conflicted with operational needs, which I handled while others attended. When I asked directly once, what I needed to do to move forward, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're dependable. That's rare. Don't ruin it by wanting more." I remember nodding, smiling, thanking him for the advice, and then going to the bathroom and staring at myself in the mirror for a long time, trying to figure out when exactly dependable became a warning instead of a compliment. That's the thing people don't talk about when they talk about humiliation before service ends. It's not someone screaming in your face. It's someone calmly building a ceiling above you and convincing you it's the sky. By the time the storm happened, I had already internalized it. That I wasn't the type people promoted. That I was valuable but replaceable. That recognition was for louder people, flashier people, people who knew how to perform confidence instead of just doing the job. So when that man on the roadside asked only for my name, no title, no context, I didn't think he was being polite. I thought he was being dismissive, like everyone else. I didn't give him my rank because, honestly, at that point, it felt like something I wore for other people's convenience, not a reflection of who I was. I went back to my routine, back to being useful, back to being quiet. And I didn't know yet that for the first time in years, someone had seen me outside the system that had been shrinking me. I also didn't know that the system was about to be forced, very publicly, to explain itself. But at that moment, I just thought it was another day of being the girl with no name. People love talking about service like it's a highlight reel. Uniforms, ceremonies, carefully cropped photos, words like honor, discipline, brotherhood. They never talk about the quiet math of it, the way your usefulness gets calculated against your replaceability. On paper, my service record looked solid. No disciplinary issues, consistent performance, above-average operational metrics, strong physical scores, adaptable, reliable. That word again, reliable. What the paper didn't show was how that reliability got extracted from me piece by piece. I was the one called when equipment failed 5 minutes before inspection. The one who stayed when someone else had family stuff. The one trusted with responsibility, but never authority. At first, I was proud of it. I came from a place where doing the job well mattered, where you didn't ask for praise, you earned your keep. I thought, if I just kept my head down, kept delivering, someone above would notice. That belief lasted about a year. Then patterns started to emerge. Whenever something critical needed to be done quietly, efficiently, without error, it landed on my desk. Whenever something visible came up, briefings, presentations, moments that got remembered, my name disappeared from the list. My senior sergeant framed it like mentorship. "You don't need the spotlight," he'd say. "You're more valuable behind the scenes. Some people lead from the front. Some support the mission." Support the mission. As if the mission ever supported me back. The workload crept up gradually. Extra shifts slipped into my schedule without discussion. Night duty became temporary, then permanent. I was always told it was just until things stabilized. They never did. I learned early not to complain. Complaints turn into reputations, and reputations stick longer than truth. So I documented everything quietly, took notes, saved emails, logged hours. Not because I planned revenge, because something in me understood I was being boxed in, even if I didn't yet know how or why. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion. It was the way he talked about me to others. Not insults, never that. Just strategic minimization. "She's great at execution, not so much at leadership. Very dependable, but not exactly inspiring. We need her where she is. Always we. Always vague. Always final." Once, during a briefing with visiting command, someone asked a technical question that directly related to work I'd designed. I opened my mouth to answer. My sergeant cut in smoothly. "I'll handle that." He answered it wrong. I corrected the issue later, quietly, after the visitors left. He thanked me privately. "See?" he said. "Team effort." I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, realizing something cold and clarifying. He wasn't overlooking me. He was managing me, managing my expectations, my visibility, my future. Because as long as I stayed where I was, he looked efficient. His unit ran smoothly. His metrics stayed clean. Promoting me would mean replacing me, and replacements come with risk. So he fed me just enough validation to keep me functioning, and just enough doubt to keep me still. And the system let him. That's what people don't understand about humiliation in uniform. It doesn't always look like abuse. Sometimes it looks like professional judgment. Sometimes it wears the mask of concern. By the time I started thinking about leaving, I wasn't angry yet. I was tired. Tired in a deep, cellular way. Like my ambition had been slowly siphoned off and repurposed to fuel someone else's authority. I told myself it was temporary. That service was about sacrifice. That recognition wasn't why I signed up. All of that was true. But what I didn't realize then was this. Sacrifice stops being noble the moment someone else starts deciding how much of you they're entitled to. And I had already given them more than they deserved. The storm on that road didn't feel important at the time. It felt like muscle memory. Help who you can. Move on. Don't expect thanks. But it happened at the exact moment I had stopped expecting the system to ever see me. Which is probably why what came next hit everyone else so much harder than it hit me. Because by then, I already knew exactly how invisible I was supposed to be. And I had no idea how visible I was about to become. If you've never experienced pressure that's designed to look like professionalism, it's hard to explain how damaging it is. There were no threats, no yelling, no explicit cruelty. Just a constant, low-grade constriction. Like living with a hand slowly tightening around your wrist. Always just gentle enough that you can't call it violence. After the storm, nothing changed on the surface. That's important. People always expect some dramatic shift. Anger, retaliation, tension. There was none of that. What there was refinement. My senior sergeant became more precise. Award submissions didn't get denied anymore. That would have been traceable. Instead, they were returned for minor corrections. Formatting, wording, missing signatures that somehow only became missing on the last possible day. By the time everything was fixed, the deadline had passed. Unfortunate, he'd say. Timing matters. Training requests weren't rejected either. They were delayed, pushed to the next cycle, then the next. Always with a calm explanation about operational needs. Guess who those needs always landed on? Me. He started asking questions in public. Never accusations. Questions. Are you sure this was handled according to protocol? Do you feel ready for that level of responsibility? Wouldn't it be safer to assign this to someone more established? Each question landed like a suggestion, but suggestions carry weight when they come from someone who controls your evaluations. I learned to answer carefully. Neutral tone, no defensiveness, no emotion. Inside, I was furious. But anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. Angry women get labeled. Angry soldiers get sidelined. So I adapted. I double-checked everything, triple-checked, documented processes that didn't require documentation, built redundancies so thorough they bordered on paranoia. He noticed. "You're getting tense," he said once, almost kindly. "Don't burn yourself out." Burnout. As if the pressure wasn't intentional. The humiliation reached a new level during inspections. Whenever higher command visited, I was reassigned. Logistics, storage, supply. Always necessary work. Always invisible. "You're reliable," he'd say, handing me the keys. "I need someone I can trust." I watched junior people I'd trained, stand where I should have stood. Answer questions about systems I'd built. Receive nods and smiles meant for someone else. No one questioned it. Why would they? On paper, everything looked orderly. That's the genius of systematic pressure. It leaves no bruises, just erosion. At night, I started dreaming about being late, about forgetting things, about standing in rooms where people talked around me like I wasn't there. I'd wake up angry at myself for caring so much. I told myself to toughen up, that this was just part of service, that everyone paid dues. But there's a difference between paying dues and being used as currency. I remember one specific moment that finally cracked something open in me. We were wrapping up a long week. Everyone was exhausted. I'd covered 3 shifts that weren't mine, fixed a reporting issue that would have embarrassed the unit badly. As we were leaving, he stopped me. "Good work this week," he said. I waited. "That's what I need from you," he added. "Consistency." Then he smiled, just slightly. "Don't get ideas about advancement. This unit needs stability." There it was. Clean, clear, undeniable. I wasn't stalled because of performance. I wasn't overlooked by accident. I was being contained. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed in full uniform, boots still on, staring at the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't punch anything. I just felt hollow. That's when I started planning my exit. Not dramatically, quietly. If the system didn't want me to grow, then I'd grow somewhere it couldn't reach me. What I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that someone far above this unit had already started asking questions. Not because of a complaint, not because of paperwork, but because of a storm, a stalled car, and a name that refused to stay buried. At the time, though, all I felt was pressure, constant, methodical, and designed to make me doubt myself just enough to stay exactly where they wanted me. And I almost did. Almost. By the time I understood that humiliation was being used deliberately, it was already routine. That's the part that scares me now, looking back. How easily something abnormal can become normal when it's wrapped in procedure and authority. My senior sergeant never humiliated me directly, not in the way people imagine. There were no insults shouted across the room, no dramatic confrontations. He didn't need that. What he did was smarter and far more effective. He humiliated me by removal. Whenever senior command was scheduled to visit, my name quietly disappeared from the roster. I wouldn't be told in advance. I'd show up ready, uniform pressed, notes prepared, and he'd stop me at the door. Change of plans? No explanation. I'd be sent to logistics, storage, supply inventory, necessary work, hard work, work that keeps everything running but never gets seen. "You're reliable," he'd say, handing me a clipboard or a set of keys. "I need someone I can trust." That phrase again. Like trust was a leash. I remember standing in a storage room once, listening to the muffled sound of voices from the main hall. Laughter, questions, applause. I knew exactly what was happening in there. I knew whose systems were being discussed. I knew which problems had already been solved because of me. And I also knew that no one would ever know. Later, people would come back energized, talking about how well the visit went. "Command was impressed," someone said once. "They really liked how smooth everything ran." I nodded, smiled, said nothing. Because correcting the narrative would have meant explaining the system that erased me, and explaining that system would have branded me as difficult. Humiliation doesn't always hurt because it's cruel. Sometimes it hurts because it's quietly correctable, and you're not allowed to correct it. He reinforced it socially, too. In group settings, he'd frame me carefully. "She's great at follow-through. Very dependable. Not really leadership material, but essential. Essential. Like equipment." Once, during a conversation about promotions, someone joked that I was overdue. My sergeant laughed softly. "She wouldn't want that pressure." He didn't look at me when he said it. Everyone laughed. I smiled. Inside, something hardened. Because that was the moment I realized he wasn't just blocking opportunities. He was rewriting my identity in front of others, making sure they believed I belonged exactly where he kept me. After a while, people stopped asking me questions in meetings. They'd ask him instead, even about things I'd built. He'd answer confidently, sometimes inaccurately. I'd fix the issues afterward, quietly, because letting things fail would hurt the unit. And he knew that. That's the sick brilliance of it. He relied on my integrity to maintain control over me. The humiliation peaked during one inspection cycle. I'd worked nearly 3 weeks straight, minimal sleep, constant pressure. Everything passed perfectly. On the final day, as everyone gathered for acknowledgments, he pulled me aside. "You can head out early," he said. "We've got this covered." Covered by people who'd done none of the groundwork. I walked past the group, out of the room, down the hall, and into the parking lot. I sat in my car and just stared. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I felt erased. That's when I stopped trying to prove myself. Not in a dramatic way. I still did my job. Still did it well. But something shifted internally. I stopped expecting fairness. Stopped believing effort would be rewarded automatically. I started thinking in terms of survival, not validation. And that's dangerous for people who depend on your silence. Because once you stop seeking approval, humiliation loses half its power. What they didn't realize was that by stripping me of visibility, they were also stripping themselves of control. They thought I was contained, managed, predictable. But humiliation, when used too long, doesn't break everyone. Sometimes it just teaches them to wait. And I was very, very good at waiting. Control doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in quietly, like dust, until one day you realize every surface belongs to someone else. By then, everyone had accepted my role, including me, which is the part I hate admitting. I became the one who fixes things, not officially, not on any chart, just culturally. When something broke, my name came up before the problem finished being described. "She'll handle it. Give it to her. She won't mess it up." It sounded like respect. It functioned like confinement. People stopped offering help, not because they were cruel, but because the system trained them not to. If I handled it anyway, why step in? If I never complained, why assume I needed support? My senior sergeant leaned into that reputation. He started delegating authority through me without ever granting it to me. I coordinated schedules I had no power to approve, resolved conflicts I couldn't officially address, enforced standards I wasn't allowed to set. If something went wrong, it was my oversight. If something went right, it was his leadership. And every time I tried to draw a boundary, just a small one, it was framed as instability. "You seem stressed lately. Are you sure you're up for this responsibility? Maybe we need to slow things down for you." Slow things down, while piling more on. I watched how carefully he spoke to others, encouraging, open, interested. With me, everything was transactional. He never asked how I was doing, only whether something was done. Once, I overheard him talking about me to another NCO, not whispering, not hiding it. "She's solid," he said, "but she doesn't really aspire." Aspire. I was running half the unit. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. He wasn't just controlling my workload. He was controlling the narrative around my ambition. As long as others believed I lacked it, no one would question why I wasn't advancing. Control works best when it feels consensual. I started to notice how often my name was used without my presence. Decisions made with her input. Plans adjusted because she prefers it this way. Constraints justified by her availability. I hadn't agreed to any of it. But correcting those statements would have required confrontation. And confrontation would have been labeled emotional, unprofessional, disruptive. So I stayed quiet. And silence, once again, did the work for him. Physically, I was unraveling. Sleep came in fragments. My hands shook sometimes, not enough to be obvious, but enough that I noticed. I drank more coffee than water, skipped meals because stopping felt inefficient. Mentally, I shrank. Not in capability, never that, but in presence. I stopped offering ideas unless asked directly, stopped volunteering for visible tasks, stopped imagining a future that included this place. He noticed that too. "See," he said once, "you're more comfortable when things are simple." Simple, like being flattened. The strangest part was how normalized it all felt. People joked about how I lived here, how I was married to the unit, how I'd never leave. They meant it as praise. I smiled, joked back, played the role. But internally, something was decoupling. The part of me that cared what they thought was quietly packing its bags. Control relies on predictability, on the belief that the person being controlled will continue to act in their own restraint. What my senior sergeant didn't understand was that I wasn't staying because I believed in him. I was staying because I was preparing myself to leave without collapsing. And control, real control, slips the moment the person you're managing stops needing your approval. I didn't challenge him, didn't argue, didn't rebel. I just started observing him the way he'd always observed me. And I realized something unsettling. He wasn't confident. He was afraid. Afraid that without people like me absorbing the pressure, his leadership would be exposed for what it really was: delegation without accountability. He thought he had me contained. But control only works as long as the person being controlled still believes the system defines them. By then, I already knew it didn't. I just hadn't decided yet how publicly I wanted to prove it. Control doesn't slam into your life all at once. It settles in quietly, almost politely, until one day you realize every decision you make is happening inside boundaries you didn't choose. By that point, everyone around me had accepted my role, including me, and that admission still makes my stomach tighten. I was the one who fixes things. Not officially, not on any board or chart, just culturally. If something broke, my name came up before the problem was fully explained. Give it to her. She'll handle it. She won't screw it up. It sounded like respect. It functioned like a trap. People stopped offering help, not out of cruelty, but conditioning. Why help someone who always manages anyway? Why step in when silence keeps the system running smoothly? My senior sergeant leaned into it hard. He started routing authority through me without ever giving it to me. I coordinated schedules I couldn't approve, resolved conflicts I wasn't allowed to document, enforced standards I had no power to set. If something went wrong, it was my oversight. If something went right, it was his leadership. And anytime I tried to draw even the smallest boundary, it was reframed as instability. "You seem overwhelmed lately. Are you sure you're ready for this level of responsibility? Maybe we should ease up on you." Ease up, while stacking more on my plate. I watched how he spoke to others, open, encouraging, curious. With me, everything was transactional. He never asked how I was doing, only whether something was done. Once, I overheard him talking to another NCO about me. He wasn't whispering. "She's solid," he said, "but she doesn't really aspire." That word hit harder than any insult. Aspire. I was running half the unit. That was the moment it clicked. He wasn't just controlling my workload. He was controlling the story about me. As long as others believed I lacked ambition, no one would question why I wasn't advancing. Control works best when it feels consensual. I started noticing how often my name was used without my presence. Decisions made with her input. Plans adjusted because she prefers it this way. Limitations justified by her availability. None of that was true, but correcting it would have meant confrontation. And confrontation would have branded me as emotional, difficult, unprofessional. So I stayed quiet, and my silence did exactly what it was supposed to do. Physically, I was deteriorating. Sleep came in fragments. My hands shook sometimes, not enough for others to notice, but enough that I did. Coffee replaced meals. Rest felt inefficient. Mentally, I shrank. Not in skill, never that, but in presence. I stopped offering ideas unless asked directly, stopped volunteering for visible tasks, stopped imagining a future that included this place. He noticed the shift. "See?" he said once. "You're more comfortable when things are simple." Simple, like being flattened. The worst part was how normalized it all felt. People joked that I lived here, that I was married to the unit, that I'd never leave. They meant it as praise. I smiled, joked back, played my role, but inside, something was detaching. The part of me that cared what they thought was quietly packing its bags. Control depends on predictability, on the belief that the person being managed will continue managing themselves into exhaustion. What my senior sergeant didn't realize was that I wasn't staying because I believed in him or the system. I was staying because I was preparing myself to leave without breaking. And control slips the moment the person under it stops seeking approval. I didn't challenge him, didn't argue, didn't rebel. I started watching him instead. And that's when I saw it clearly. He wasn't confident. He was afraid. Afraid that without people like me absorbing the pressure, his leadership would collapse under scrutiny. Afraid that if someone looked too closely, they'd see delegation without accountability. He thought he had me contained. But control only works as long as the person being controlled believes the system defines who they are. By then, I already knew it didn't. I just hadn't decided yet how public I wanted that realization to be. The call didn't come with drama, no build-up, no warning signs. Just a short message delivered the way power prefers. Clean, unexplained, unquestionable. I was finishing a report when my phone vibrated. "Command wants to see you." No emojis, no context, no tone. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest. In my experience, summons without explanation were rarely good news. They meant something had gone wrong, or someone wanted to remind you how small you were. When I stepped into the hallway, my senior sergeant was already there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching me the way people watch elevators, detached, mildly impatient. "Dress uniform," he said, immediately. That was new. I raised an eyebrow, just slightly. He noticed. "Don't get curious," he added. "It's not a ceremony." Then, with a smirk, he didn't bother hiding. "Try not to embarrass the unit." That landed exactly where he intended. Embarrass. As if my existence carried that risk. I nodded once and walked past him without responding. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I'd learned that silence unsettled him more than compliance. In my room, I put on my dress uniform with mechanical precision. Every crease, perfect. Every insignia, exactly where it belonged. Muscle memory took over, even as my mind spiraled. I ran through possibilities. Complaint, inspection fallout, some paperwork issue he'd decided to pin on me. For a moment, just a moment, I wondered if the storm had anything to do with this. Then I dismissed it. That was absurd. People didn't get summoned for helping strangers on the side of the road. I walked into the administrative building 10 minutes early. Habit. Control where you can. Outside the office, I saw something that made my pulse spike. My senior sergeant wasn't alone. Two other officers stood nearby. One avoided my eyes entirely. The other looked at me with something close to pity. That was worse than anger. "Wait here," my sergeant said, gesturing toward a chair. He went inside alone. Minutes passed. Too many. Then the door opened, and a voice I didn't recognize said, "Send her in." Not send the soldier. Not send the subordinate. Send her. I stepped into the office, and everything tilted. A 4-star general stood near the window, hands behind his back. His presence filled the room effortlessly, the way real authority does, quiet, immovable. Sitting across from him, reviewing a folder, was the man from the storm. The same calm eyes, the same stillness. He looked up and recognized me instantly. My senior sergeant froze halfway through closing the door behind me. "You," he said, too sharply. The general turned slowly. Yes, he replied. Her. Silence stretched. The general gestured for me to stand at ease, then opened the folder in his hands. My file. I recognized the tabs, the notes, the careful organization I'd never known anyone above my unit bothered to look at. He read without speaking for a long time, long enough for my sergeant to start shifting his weight, long enough for sweat to bead at his temple. Finally, the general looked up. You have an interesting record, he said to me. Exceptional operational metrics, consistent responsibility, no disciplinary issues. Pause. And no significant recognition. He let that hang in the air. Then he turned his gaze, not to me, but to my senior sergeant. Would you like to explain that? My sergeant opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. She's reliable, he said finally. We've prioritized mission stability. The general nodded once. Stability, he repeated, at the cost of development. Then he looked back at the man from the storm. This is the one. The man nodded. She stopped in conditions where most people wouldn't. She didn't identify herself, didn't seek credit. The general exhaled slowly. Interesting. My sergeant looked like the floor had shifted under him. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't control the room. And for the first time in years, I realized something was happening that none of them could redirect, delay, or bury. Whatever this meeting was, it wasn't about humiliating me. It was about exposing them. If you've ever been in a room where power quietly changes hands, you know the feeling. The air thickens. People stop breathing normally. Time stretches in uncomfortable ways. That office felt like that. The four-star general didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority like his doesn't announce itself. It waits. He motioned for everyone to sit. Everyone except me. She can remain standing, he said calmly. This concerns her. My senior sergeant swallowed hard and took a seat. It was the first time I'd ever seen him sit without being told he could speak. The man from the storm leaned back slightly, arms crossed, watching everything with quiet interest. Not judgment, observation. Like this wasn't a surprise, just confirmation. The general opened my file again. Let's talk about patterns, he said. He flipped a page. Consistently high performance evaluations, followed by unexplained score reductions. Another page. Award submissions returned for corrections after deadlines. Another. Repeated reassignment during command visits. He looked up. That's not coincidence. That's management. My sergeant tried to smile. Sir, those decisions were made for operational. Stop, the general said. Not loudly, not angrily. Just stop. The word landed like a closed door. Operational necessity does not explain why her responsibilities increased while her advancement stalled, the general continued. Nor does it explain why junior personnel were promoted ahead of her without comparable metrics. He turned his chair slightly, now facing my sergeant fully. Do you deny restricting her visibility? Silence. Do you deny obstructing her recommendations? More silence. Do you deny reframing her role publicly to limit her perceived ambition? My sergeant's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Whatever explanation he'd rehearsed clearly didn't survive contact with someone who had already done the homework. The general nodded slowly. Your silence answers for you. He turned to me. Did you ever file a formal complaint? I shook my head. Why not? He asked. I answered honestly. Because it wouldn't have changed the system, only my reputation. That got a reaction, not from the general, but from the man from the storm, who glanced at me sharply, then smiled faintly, like he'd just heard something he'd been waiting for. The general studied me for a moment. You're aware that silence can enable misconduct? Yes, sir, I replied. And I'm also aware of how retaliation works. That was the first time my sergeant looked directly at me. There was something close to panic in his eyes. The general closed the folder. "You were right," he said. Then he turned back to my sergeant. "You confused control with leadership. No accusation, just a statement of fact. You leveraged her competence to protect your position. You deprived this unit of a developing officer to preserve your own comfort." The man from the storm spoke then. "She didn't identify herself during the incident," he said. "Didn't seek recognition. Didn't even mention her unit." He paused. "I had to ask for her name." The general nodded. "That restraint speaks volumes." My sergeant finally tried to defend himself. "Sir, I never meant to—" "Intent is irrelevant," the general cut in smoothly. "Impact is not." That was it. That was the sentence that broke him. The general stood. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of supervisory authority." My sergeant's head snapped up. "Sir, you will issue a public acknowledgement of misconduct," the general continued. "You will cooperate with a formal investigation, and you will not contact this officer outside official proceedings." He turned to me again. "As for you, this conversation isn't over, but it will continue on your terms." I felt something then. Not triumph, not revenge, relief. The kind that loosens muscles you didn't realize you'd been clenching for years. As I left the office, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time since I'd put on that uniform, the system that tried to erase me was being forced to look directly at what it had done. And it was terrified. The fallout didn't wait for permission. By the time I stepped out of that office, the hallway felt different. Quieter, tighter, like the building itself was holding its breath. People looked up too quickly, then away. Word travels fast in places built on hierarchy. It travels faster when something breaks the usual gravity. I was told to wait, not sent away, not dismissed, told to wait. That alone would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. The general requested a unit-wide assembly, immediate, mandatory, no explanations given. That was when I knew this wasn't going to be handled quietly, and for the first time, my stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the weight of visibility. I stood off to the side of the hall as people filed in. Faces I knew. Faces I'd trained. Faces that had joked with me, leaned on me, overlooked me. Conversations died when they noticed where I was standing. My senior sergeant entered last. He looked smaller. Not physically. He was still tall, still straight-backed, but stripped of something invisible he'd always worn like armor. Confidence, assumption, the belief that no one above him would ever bother to look closely. The general stepped forward. No preamble, no softening. "This unit is being addressed due to a failure of leadership." You could feel the room flinch. He spoke calmly, methodically, the way people do when they're stating facts that cannot be argued away. He outlined patterns, not names, at first, just behaviors. Obstruction of advancement, misuse of authority, exploitation of competence without recognition. He spoke in clean language, the kind that leaves no room for interpretation. Then he stopped. "This is not theoretical." He turned slightly. "This officer was systematically restricted, reassigned, and denied acknowledgement while carrying critical responsibility." Every eye turned to me. I didn't move. I didn't straighten. Didn't lower my gaze. Didn't smile. I stood exactly as I was. The general continued. When questioned, her supervisor justified this behavior as stability. A ripple moved through the room. "Stability built on suppression is not stability," the general said. "It is failure." He looked directly at my senior sergeant. "Step forward." The silence was absolute. My sergeant obeyed, mechanical, automatic, years of training kicking in even as his face drained of color. "You will issue a formal acknowledgement," the general said. "Now." There it was. Public. Unavoidable. Irreversible. My sergeant swallowed. He began. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I failed to support and develop a subordinate under my command, he said. I misused my authority and obstructed her professional advancement. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. I apologize. Not to the unit, not to command, to me. I felt it then, the shock ripple outward, people shifting, processing, rewriting years of assumptions in real time. The general wasn't finished. You are relieved of supervisory duties effective immediately, he said. An investigation is underway. You will cooperate fully. He turned back to the unit. Let this be clear. Competence is not a resource to be exploited. Silence is not consent. And leadership that survives only by keeping others small will not survive scrutiny. That was the moment the horror set in. Not just for my sergeant, but for everyone who had benefited from not asking questions. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed and strangely calm, because humiliation only works when it's private and unchallenged, when it's turned inward. This was accountability. After the assembly, people didn't know how to approach me. Some avoided me entirely. Others nodded awkwardly. A few whispered apologies they didn't quite understand themselves. I didn't need any of it. The reckoning wasn't about validation. It was about truth being spoken in a room where it had been deliberately muted. And once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. For years, I'd been managed as a background function. That day, the system said my name out loud, and nothing was ever going to fit back into the old shape again. The awards came quietly at first, like the system wasn't sure I was real yet. No ceremony, no audience, just paperwork moving at a speed I'd never seen before. Emails answered the same day, signatures appearing without being chased, doors opening without explanations required. It was disorienting. For years, everything connected to me had stalled. Forms, requests, acknowledgement, like I existed in a pocket of administrative gravity. Now, things moved as if friction had been removed. The first commendation was handed to me in a small office. No speech, no cameras. This should have happened a long time ago, the general said. I didn't respond immediately, not because I was overwhelmed, but because a part of me was waiting for the catch, the delay, the correction request, the invisible hand pushing it back. Nothing happened. The second recognition followed within days. Then the promotion process began. That one wasn't quiet. Whispers started, side glances, people recalculating in real time. I could almost hear the mental rewrites happening around me. Oh, that's who she is. That's why things worked. That's why she never complained. I didn't enjoy it. Visibility after invisibility feels like standing under a spotlight with your eyes still adjusted to the dark. My former sergeant avoided me completely. When we crossed paths, he looked through me like I was part of the wall. It wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. Fear of being remembered for exactly what he'd tried to bury. When the promotion was finalized, I was asked how I wanted it handled. That question alone felt surreal. How did I want it handled? I asked for it to be done properly, publicly, cleanly, no drama, no embellishment, not for revenge, for record. The day it happened, the unit stood in formation. Familiar faces, different energy, no smirks, no casual superiority, just attention. The general spoke briefly. He talked about standards, about leadership, about how effectiveness without ethics corrodes institutions from the inside. Then he called my name, my full name. I stepped forward. And when he read my new rank aloud, something settled in my chest that I didn't realize had been unstable for years. Not pride. Alignment. This is who I am. This is where I stand. This is not an accident. Afterward, people lined up to shake my hand. Some genuine, some performative. I accepted them all with the same neutral professionalism. I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to be accurate. Later that day, someone asked me quietly why I'd never pushed harder before, why I'd stayed silent so long. I thought about it. Because I needed to be sure, I said. Sure that when it came out, it wouldn't be dismissed as noise. They nodded like they understood. They didn't. Not really. What I didn't say was this. I stayed quiet because I was being trained by pressure, by control, by humiliation, to know exactly how systems fail. And once you understand that, you don't rush exposure. You wait until the truth can't be contained. When I walked out that evening, wearing my uniform with its new insignia, no one stopped me. No one questioned me. No one redirected me to storage or logistics or the back of the room. Someone asked who I was, casually, like it was just conversation. And for the first time, I answered without hesitation. With my name, with my rank, with the place they'd tried to deny me. And this time, the system agreed. I didn't post this right away. Part of me wanted distance, space to see what stuck after the uniforms, the speeches, the formal words. Because anyone who's been through something like this knows, the real test isn't the reckoning. It's the quiet that comes after. Here's what changed. People stopped joking about how I lived here. They stopped assigning me things without asking. They stopped talking around me, not because they suddenly became better people, but because the system had drawn a line, and lines make people cautious. Here's what didn't change. Some people still avoided eye contact. Some were suddenly very friendly in a way that felt rehearsed. A few acted like they'd always supported me, which was honestly the most exhausting part. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. Because the truth no longer depended on my voice alone. The investigation moved forward without me having to chase it. That was new. I was interviewed, asked clear questions, given time to answer without interruption. No one implied I was overreacting. No one suggested I reframe. That alone felt like an alternate universe. My former sergeant was reassigned pending outcome. I won't pretend I felt nothing about that. I felt something complicated, relief, yes, but also a strange sadness. Not for him, but for how much damage one insecure person can do when given unchecked authority. I don't hate him. Hate requires intimacy. What I felt was clarity. After everything settled, I took leave. Real leave. The kind where your phone stays face down and no one expects you to be reachable. I slept. I ate meals slowly. I noticed how tense my body had been for years. That's when the emotional part really hit. Anger came late. Grief came later. I grieved the version of myself that thought endurance was the same as worth. That thought silence was strength. That believed if she just worked harder, fairness would eventually notice. Acceptance didn't come as forgiveness. It came as boundaries. I learned that systems don't change because you suffer quietly inside them. They change when someone with leverage is forced to look. And sometimes, leverage comes from the most ordinary thing. A storm, a stalled car, a decision to stop when you didn't have to. If you're reading this and you're in that place, the invisible place, the reliable but stagnant place, here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. Document everything. Protect your integrity more than your image. Don't confuse being needed with being valued. And most importantly, humiliation thrives in isolation. Once it's named, witnessed, and placed where it belongs, on the person using it, it loses its power. I didn't win because I was louder. I didn't win because I was perfect. I won because when the moment came, the truth was already intact. So yeah, that's my story. I'm still serving. I'm still learning. And I'm done being small for other people's comfort. If this helps even one person recognize what's happening to them a little earlier than I did, then posting it was worth it.